Co-hosting the discussion forum with Jenetta today is property investor developer Sarah Flynn. Sarah founded her business following the tragic death of her 19-year-old brother, which had a profound impact on her life, leading her to pursue her dream as a serial entrepreneur. Sarah regularly speaks publicly about her journey in her mission to inspire others to also believe that there is life after trauma. She also hosts her inspirational podcast, The Ambitious Entrepreneur, where she interviews successful multi-million-pound business owners, Olympic gold medalists, and film producers. Please welcome Sarah Flynn.
Welcome everybody to this very special discussion forum today, and I am delighted to have a very meaningful team of people join me. We're sitting here having a coffee day. If it had been the normal world, we'd be sitting around in a lounge with our coffees, but here we are discussing today mental health wellness, and especially talking about where we've felt anxious or depressed or dealing with a disorder or a trauma, a long list of things that one feels in terms of not feeling mentally at ease. And so we're going to talk about that. I had my hair done a couple of days ago, and my hairdresser was saying to me, but I've never been depressed. I have no idea what it's like to feel like that. And you're going to hear quite a lot of people contributing this evening as we discuss A, what it's like, and B, what they've done to work through whatever it is they've experienced before. So I would like to start off by talking about what they've experienced.
I suffered from depression, which led to a eating disorder. To describe depression, I would say it's quite a hard feeling to describe, but I was always sad, and I know that sounds very normal, but it was like a sinking feeling. And even being around like my family, I was still just not happy, and I didn't want to wake up in the morning. I didn't want to be around anyone. I used to sleep a lot. And this led me to having an eating disorder. I became very good at hiding my eating disorder, to the point where no one even knew, not even my mum, until I had to go to a doctor. And it was awful. And I was so desperate to get better that I reached out. It was the hardest bit of the whole process, was to reach out. But when I did, and I started working with Jenetta every day, it wasn't easy. Nothing about it was remotely easy, but I learned the skills that have led me to lead a very normal life today.
It's so interesting because I remember boarding school being the one to take girls to the nurse because of their eating disorders, and I just always wanted to know what it would take to kind of shift and say, right, I want help, and what had to change for you to accept that, because as you said, it's the hardest part in the whole process is accepting the problem.
Yeah, so the hardest part is accepting that you have a problem, and the hardest thing with being bulimic is you're faking it the whole time, that you actually become so good at it that like not even my mum could work out what was wrong with me, to the point how it came out. Actually, I had severe burns down my throat, and it got so severe that I had to go to a doctor. And the doctor then said to me, right, you're not going out of this room because you and I both know what's happened. And eventually I had to admit it to my mum. And when I admitted it out loud to my mum, I then broke down and realized that I needed help severely, and I couldn't do it on my own. And my mum was brilliant, was just so strong, and she just took me, phoned Jenetta, and with the support of my family, it took a long time. It took me a whole year before I could face a plate of food and not want to run to the bathroom and chuck it all up again. I went to a really stereotypical girls' school, and I think being young, social media these days puts so much pressure on girls. And I slowly learned to accept my body, my body shape, and slowly, I think with the support group as well, like Savannah said, it's so important. My close friends stood by me throughout the whole thing, and today I can count those friends on one hand. So yeah.
So what's the biggest shift you've had from when you were in that space to now?
I think the biggest shift obviously is my mindset, but the biggest thing is that I can look at my social media and I can say, oh, she's pretty, and not think, oh, she's pretty, I want to change my body to be like that. Yeah, I can, that for me was the biggest thing. How many likes do you get on your picture? Now I don't give 2 minutes. So I think that was the biggest shift. It comes with challenges. I really had to work hard at it. I also damaged my body physically. Like I lost my period for a while. I had huge ulcers down my throat. So I had to fix myself physically. I couldn't eat everything straight away. I couldn't just be like, oh yeah, I feel like a pizza. So I had to really, really work hard at it. But I think the key is that I wanted it so badly. I wanted to be better.
That's what I admired so much with you, is that you never not pitched. You were always there and present. And you were in the certification program, you plowed through your exercises come hell or high water. That's exactly what we were saying the other day, is that when somebody like you, Larissa, has an eating disorder like this, and it's so overwhelming, and it's your biggest kept secret, and you'd rather die than anybody know that you have that secret, and then it comes out like this, and you go, okay, I'm going to do what it takes to get through it. Just the courage of pitching up tonight and talking about it. It has the potential to help so many other people sitting on this call dealing with that form of depression through an eating disorder, because it definitely is so attached to what you perceive others think or don't think of you. And just so honorable that you could step forward and talk about this. How did you hide things?
Well, I was at school, so I would go to a mealtime with all my friends as normal, eat a big plate of food, and I would always remember the first bit of food I'd eat, and then afterwards I'd go to a bathroom which I knew no one would come past, and I would make myself throw up until I'd seen that bit of food come up, so I knew that there was nothing left in my stomach. It's quite gruesome. It is gruesome. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a pleasant thing to do to yourself. But when you're that mentally, I want to say ill, you just can't distinguish between what's normal and what's not. Like I was so focused on making sure that no food went past my gullet that I really think, like, if I think back at it now, I think, how can someone do that to themselves? Yet I did it to me. And I think the hardest thing I dealt with when it came out was people like, oh, she does it for attention. And I think people are so quick to judge, and there was a whole reason as to why I did it, and I was not in the right frame of mind. And that, I think, was my hardest battle. I had to go to Jenetta a few times a week to get over that. But I think with girls today, I mean, I'm a teacher now and I work with girls, and I see it every day, and I just think, it's so damaging. That one comment, she does it for attention. Even to this day, if someone says something remotely close to that, I still struggle a little with it, and I have to really process it, because I think mental health and eating disorders especially people are so quick to say, oh, it's for attention, and a lot of the time it's not. There's lots of reasons behind it. Mine was, due to severe depression. So yeah.
I wonder, at any point, was there a sense of relief that you didn't have to keep the secret anymore, that other people knew? And yes, obviously there was support there, and that's when the battle began. But at what point did you really have a sense of, oh, it's not just me. This isn't just about me keeping this secret.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was in that doctor's room, and just relief that I was almost, I don't know if I would have stepped forward and said to my mum, I have this problem, if the doctor hadn't worked it out before me. But there was a huge sense of relief. And when I first saw Jenetta, I knew it was going to be hard. I knew I was going to find it really tough, but huge relief and the first thing she said to me was, it's normal. And I thought, what is this lady on about? It's normal. And I think she just said, you're a young girl, and I've seen so many people and they've come out the other end. And I just thought, this lady's on the same page as me. And then from then on, I just completely trusted what Jenetta taught me. I didn't find the epiphany process at all easy to start with. I didn't believe questions could fix you. So yeah, huge relief. And also that my mum, she was upset, but she was ready to help me, and she didn't turn away from me, I think.
Or judge.
And my family, or judge. And also my friends that stuck by me, I did lose friends along the way, but the ones that have stuck by me, our friendship now is really strong. And yeah, but there was a huge sense of relief, and weight had lifted off my shoulders, that I no longer had to, one, put myself through a terrible experience every time I had a meal time, and two, there were people that were going to help me and guide me along the way.
I slipped into depression and anxiety at the same time, not knowing when and how. It came via PTSD, and when I slipped. It was dark. It felt like an outer body experience. I don't even know if that makes sense, but it didn't feel like Sadia. It just felt like another person came out and took over my brain. It was just so dark, I was super angry all the time, so angry, crying and just not talking to anyone, and stopped working, stopped earning, just stopped everything, and just allowed it to sit in my body for too long, Now it's just being able to recognize the patterns, because it does come and go. Depression, in and out, comes in waves, just like the ocean. It's just recognizing those patterns.
I missed at the start. What happened when you originally became depressed? I didn't catch that, sorry.
I was at a terrorist attack in Nairobi at the Westgate Mall. We just had the 7-year anniversary, and this is the first time that I actually went to the mall on the day of the attack at the same time. And that just kind of triggered a whole lot of other memories and things that I hadn't processed, people who were involved with helping me that I just completely blocked out of my life. It also got to a point where I was just ashamed of who I was. I just became ashamed of what I was becoming. So I just started to cut people off. So I had no one to talk to either.
What made you go back there? I think that's really interesting that you said that you went back, obviously, and you had the courage to go back. Was it something that you felt like you had to do? Did you think you were going to benefit from it? What was your reasoning behind that? I'm just intrigued.
I feel COVID this year pushed my brain just to do things that I normally wouldn't do. And that was one of them. That was definitely one of them. Because every year for the past 6 years, I'd disappear, I'd get out of the city. I'm not going to be in Nairobi. I'm going to be away by the lake or by the beach or with friends, or just surrounded by fun stuff and not have to deal with it. But this year is like, it's time to move on. You're 32. This happened when you were 26. Or was I 25? See, don't even remember. Just time to move on, you know?
I think that's really, well, first of all, really brave and courageous that you went back there, and great that you've made that step. You know, obviously you said that you suffered depression and anxiety. When you went back there, was there an element of sort of post-traumatic stress as well? Is that something that you'd suffered with, obviously the trauma of the incident? Did that come back to you whilst you were there as well?
It oddly only hit me the next day. They say that when you're thinking of a day, like for example, you know, you're getting the day off tomorrow, you're more excited about it today than you are going to be tomorrow. So when tomorrow comes, you're like, oh, you know, so it's anxiety of the next day. And then when the next day came, that's 22nd September, not 21st, when it happened, I slipped. I kind of fell into this whole cycle all over again, not realizing that I was spiraling. And of course, we've been doing certification with Jenetta. So I kind of went back to the exercise of the week and just found myself realizing what the triggers were. I'm like, you were falling back into depression, and you just had to kind of pull yourself back. And also talking to somebody really, really helps.
What made you decide to make that change? Because I know you said before that obviously you said something along the lines of, you know, the darkness went on for too long. So what, obviously it must have been a considerable period of time that you felt this obviously anguish and dark place that you were in. What inspired you to change? What was it that was it like a light bulb moment, or did it happen gradually?
It happened gradually. It kind of started last year when I decided, okay, I need to start making changes. I'm in my 30s now. I just need to move on. So much in my life has been unstable for the longest time, and I was trying to achieve stability for 2020. And like I mentioned, COVID happened, and it was either you do the work or you just remain the same and just remain comfortable being comfortable. And just got to a point where I was so uncomfortable that I had to make a change, massive change.
And when you say change, what do you think the biggest changes that you've made that's been the most help to you?
Taking the brain trauma seriously and making the necessary changes in sense of diet, physical activity, having a job that I actually love doing, helping others, and writing again, just a bunch of stuff, just going back to who I really am, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Do you think that, because a lot of people that say, you know, going back to basics when you've suffered trauma or depression or any sort of mental health issue, you know, they say that going back to basics is probably one of the best things that you can do. Do you think that that was a key thing to, you know, even just down to sort of like having a routine, getting up, getting in the shower, having your breakfast, you know, they say that all those things are so important. Do you think in your case, is that sort of what you're saying, that just doing that kind of routine, mundane, Monday to Friday, get the job, you know, do you think that that was one of the biggest things that sort of helped you get back on track?
Oh, 100%. Just have structure with flexibility and not like completely rigid made a massive difference. Also, get up before everyone else does, and having that quiet in the morning is perfect.
I think for me, I have always been such an active, sporty person and such a busy bee that I've never been one to just sit and do nothing. And after I lost Dad, who committed suicide, it was this sudden shift of shock, and I went back to my studies in the UK, and I slipped, like everyone's talking about this slip. And the same as like Larissa said, just sleeping so tired, can't be bothered. And my biggest thing was anger. I was so angry. How dare he leave us just so unexpectedly, not leave a note with no explanation, nothing. And I was taking that anger out on my close ones. And I was so numb, and it was the worst feeling, being numb. It's just sitting in neutral and nothing was shifting. And I then really had this drive in me to get back to some form of normality. I put my hand up and I said, I need help. And my family and friends, said, try this, try that. And I think I ended up trying 5 forms of different therapy before I started with Jenetta. And it was, my godmother that actually said, here, speak to Jenetta. And I just remember the first session, I was like, wow, this is going to be hard. This is not like any personal trainer you've had, but this is going to be tough, but this is it. Because just like Larissa says, she gets me. And that was a huge shift for me, was Jenetta gets me. She has been down the suicide road and doing those mental press-ups and push-ups and being pushed and being asked all these questions and getting really frustrated and saying, well, how is that going to make me feel better? And after a few weeks, seeing the mountains that one has shifted was just phenomenal. And it really is true what everyone says, that hard work pays off.
I think that was interesting, Savannah, what you were saying about slipping into depression. And I suppose more of a comment, really, because I was depressed a long time ago, when I was about 14 to about 18. And actually I had no real reason I say no real reason, obviously, but I think there's a common misconception with depression that it's something sort of really poignant that happens in your life, and what's the reason you're depressed, and people say that, and I think that's a real sort of misconception that's out there. Well, something must have happened to you, and for me, nothing really happened. I just became depressed when I was quite young, but then obviously I got over that and I was fine. And then when I was 26, my brother died of cancer. He was 19 at the time. But what was interesting is, obviously you've experienced, similar to me, that sort of sudden loss. But for me this time, I didn't get depressed at all, and yet something so great had happened. I haven't suffered in that way at all. I just obviously had the trauma of what happened. But I think that was interesting that you said you slipped. For you it was very sort of slow, whereas this time nothing like that happened to me, but I just suddenly got really bad post-traumatic stress. I mean, like overnight. So everything was like, okay. And suddenly it all just hit me like a ton of bricks. So it was interesting because everybody else has sort of said, oh, they've had like this slipping process. But for me, I never sort of experienced that. It was just like everything came crashing down overnight, really, for me. It was just interesting how you were saying that you dealt with it. I thought that was great. And it's great that you found Jenetta and, you made those great changes. And I think just widely, I think it's fascinating that everyone's sharing these stories today, because I think that's the whole purpose of how everybody gets better. And what everybody said is it's all about sharing, and letting other people know how you're feeling and asking for that help. And everybody today has echoed, just like you were saying, Savannah, that once you got that help and you made those changes and you started speaking to people, things really started to move forward. So it's just more of a comment really than a question.
Yeah, and it's hard because yes, you can tell, we can all share our stories and things, and it's not the same as you flick through Instagram and you see. I always refer to personal trainers because Jenetta does make you do all those mental exercises, and it's probably harder than a physical workout. But you can go online, you can see people's physical transformations, and it really is almost like, wish we could have like recordings of us from when we first started with Jenetta to really show like a time lapse of how everyone developed, because in 1 week you can shift so much and be in such a different headspace to when you started. And I think the biggest thing for me, and it's something I don't actually ever talk about, is I ended up going on to antidepressants, and I never in my life thought I would be somebody that needed to do that. And when I got questioned and put on a very heavy dose, I thought, this is it. I'm not going to do this. I am going to go and dig deep and get the help myself. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do what I know I need to do, and that is get the help that's fitted for me.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point though about antidepressants. Actually, I'd just be keen to know if anybody else in here has ever been on antidepressants, because I personally, my experience is that there is a big stigma attached to people taking tablets for mental health issues, and I think that's kind of what you were alluding to there.
Yeah.
So the embarrassment and the shame of things that come with it. But you know, I think there can be a place for them if they're necessary. You know, particularly like in the case of anxiety and things. I've suffered with anxiety in the past, and I didn't actually have any tablets, but I know the people that did. You know, who were terribly out of control and just needed that kind of calm in their life. And you know, for a temporary period until they found the help, it actually did the job. But I think there's a huge stigma attached to taking any form of medication with mental health.
It is. I mean, of course, you need to get it. It got me into the place where I could come out of that dip where I was and start going up. And every session I had with Jenetta, it was like, oh, hang on a second. I don't need that. Like I'm moving up a lot quicker than the medication, but it definitely did help me up. But there, like you say, there is that stigma about taking pills, and everybody's different and everyone needs support in different ways. So yeah, but it is something that people are, I was one of them. I was ashamed to say I was taking them, and people shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm a great believer in medication in its place and in its time. So if I'm in an extremely damaging accident, I need painkillers of high proportion. So these things have their place and their time. What does happen is often they get oversubscribed. I can't talk about who, but somebody very, very close in my family was 8 years on mind-changing drugs. And that's toxic. It turns them toxic. So it's understanding that the medication is really helpful to move, or can be, not always necessary, but when it is necessary, it can be that push to be able to step into something more. You know, often a painkiller will break the pain, that just won't break without something like that. So it does have its time and space, and a lot of people require that little bit of a hop, skip and jump, and others don't. It all depends on how and what you're dealing with at that time. And you know, Sarah, I know that Victoria, you have a PTSD experience to share that Sarah might find very interesting.
I actually wanted to really salute and honor Risi and Savannah for sharing, because you truly are doing a disservice if you're not sharing all this, because it's incredibly valuable. And I actually had a question for both of you. While you were going through your hard times, what was all the feelings that you were feeling, and how did you also see how people were looking at you? And I say this because we talked a bit about the fact that she was looking a lot at social media and she was comparing herself to what she was seeing, and also the judgment there is around food behavior disorders like anorexia or bulimia, and the fact that you were crying for attention. But while you were going through your hard times, how did you feel all the time? Did you feel completely alone? So Risi had a changing point, which was going to the doctor, and then the support of her mom that made you seek for help. What were you feeling the whole time you were going through that?
I felt completely alone. I thought, if my friends find out that I'm doing this, they're not going to want to be my friends. My family, like, what are they going to think? I felt that I could turn to no one. a bit like what Savannah said, I also tried antidepressants, but then I felt like I was a robot. So yes, they wasn't feeling sad, but then I didn't really feel happy either. Like I remember going to a birthday party of my cousins and I sat there thinking, I don't want to be here. And it's meant to be a happy occasion. And also then I got round those because I chucked them up. But I just remember feeling so alone, like I had no friends. And I had to completely also relearn how to use social media. So even to this day, I will log out of everything. And some people are like, why do you do that? And I'm like, it's my way of managing it so that I don't spend too much time on it. But it took me, I think, a good 6 months to relearn how to go onto Facebook, how to look at things. And I remember sitting with Jenetta saying, I've seen this picture and it's made me feel horrendous and I have no idea why. And then I process it. The trigger that had made me feel so horrendous wouldn't have been what I thought it would be. And yeah, it was just a complete sense of alone. I felt like I was a robot, just got up, ate Weetabix because that's all I could eat, and just felt very, very alone. But then as I started to come out of it, just I think what Sarah said and Sadia, basic things I started to really focus on. So like things like making a cup of tea. I couldn't get through making a cup of tea. So I would set myself little tasks like that. I don't think I'd read a book start to finish. So as I got better, those small accomplishments, you know, to someone who doesn't have depression might think, well, reading a book, but it's huge. When you're in such a dark place, you really have to go back to basics and relearn who you are and accept. For me, it was accepting who I was, and it wasn't easy. But I think I'd got to the point where I needed a bit of tough love. You know, I'd been to so many therapists where, you know, you sit there, you tell your story, they give you a bunch of tissues, you cry, and you come out feeling good. And then an hour later, you're like, oh, that didn't work. So, you know, Jenetta's tough love, as I like to call it, really was what I needed. I needed someone to just be like, it's not giving sympathy, it's making you do the work, which is what I needed. So
Compassion.
yeah,
She didn't put you as a victim role.
exactly. Yeah. So, you know, you, to the point where you also start feeling sorry for yourself. And Jenetta's way doesn't do that. You know, you really have to work on it, and it's amazing. Like I then started to talk to close friends and feel less alone, and from there it just grew and grew.
Like Larissa, just so alone. I was so angry and I pushed everyone away because the people that I expected to be there and support myself and my brother weren't there. And then those that were there, I pushed away because I was like, what's the point? You know, you're just gonna end up like dying or just leaving me. So I did that whole like I need to protect myself and just push everyone away.
I just want to second something that Larissa said about the way that Jenetta helps us along when we're in a session with her. When I was doing my self-mastery training with her, at the time I thought at times during the course, the session with others, she was a bit tough on me. And I do realize now that it is tough love, and it's actually gentle tough love. The issue wasn't the same, but the principle is the same. When I need to make, or anybody needs to make an effort themselves as the mental gym that is mentioned so often, then that's what they need to do. And if they need a bit of a loving push, it might come across as tough, but it's the best thing that is needed for the person there and then.
I think, George, just on the back of that, then, do you think the difference between maybe traditional therapy, etc., and then working with Jenetta, and probably a question for Larissa and Savannah as well, is do you think the difference is that Jenetta makes you accountable? Do you think that's the key?
Yes, very much so, because I did a life coaching course before I did Jenetta's. And it was one of those traditional life coaching. It was good, but it was like, what would you like to do? And what are your options? And what are your goals? And breathe deeply and all that kind of stuff. And that was very interesting. And it does help with my teaching, with the neuro-linguistic programming and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't transformative.
I can add
yes,
that it makes you accountable, but it also it empowers you to mindfully decide where you want to sit. Because I can't remember who said before, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, it really, the techniques really empowers you to take ownership on where you want to sit. Like, is it too hard to do the work and you want to stay in your uncomfortable place because you're just comfortable there? It actually confronts you to that.
I think that's really interesting. Obviously, I've never worked with Jenetta, but I think that's just interesting that in terms of experiences, you've all had similar experiences, that the key difference is that this type of help with Jenetta is obviously making you directly accountable for your actions, and that's how you've ultimately all seen a shift. And I think that's really insightful, actually, just a broader, I suppose, thought about challenging mental health, illnesses and how to overcome them. I think there really is some leverage in, as you were just saying there, Victoria, sort of the empowerment piece and the accountability piece, because I think, for everybody that's spoken tonight, that seems to be what some of the biggest cultural shifts has been in being able to tackle, your issues. So I think that's fantastic.
Like today, heading to work, I was a little bit late, so I jumped onto the back of a Buddha Buddha, which is a motorcycle taxi here. So somebody else is driving it with the back of the bike. And I'm doing the 4 inhale, deep breath, second thingy majig, like doing the breaths on the back of a Buddha Buddha as I'm trying to get to work. And I'm like, that's how I just calm myself down. The anxiety was like up here, but just doing the breaths brought it back to heart. It's incredible.
For our viewers today, when I'm dealing with somebody with Sadia PTSD and Victoria as well, and even a bit of PTSD for Savannah, the first thing that I start doing, and Mandy, who's here as well, the first thing I start doing is breath work, because if you've got oxygen in your blood, everything starts balancing out. And that's what Sadia is referring to there.
So I have a very different story, a bit maybe more similar to Sadia, but I was small. I was 10 years old and I was living in a war-torn country, and we were at the wrong time and in the wrong place, and we were attacked by rebels. We ended up hiding in a ditch with my mom and my 2 sisters, another couple that was there. And we left alive out of there, just one of my sisters, myself, and another lady. So my mom and my little sister were killed just behind my back. I was covered by their bloods for as long as I was there. And yeah, so I had to get operated. I actually had to be in Nairobi for a while because there was nothing working in where I was, and just kind of lived a normal life. Never had any nightmares or anything. Never was taken to a psychologist to do therapy or anything like that. But then, as soon as I was 18 years old and I had a bit of money on my pockets, I went to see a psychologist, and other things happened to me in my life, and I was just like, this is what happened and this is what happened, and I want to be happy, and I know that this can have an impact it definitely will have an impact in my life and how I handle things or how I do things, and I don't want this to follow. But like, I think an onion has many layers, so we dealt with whatever was coming up at that time and never really with the trauma. It actually happened on the 19th of March, and it came up 19 years later on the day of my birthday. I relived the whole thing, and it was terrible. So the next day, I decided I've never been suicidal or had any suicidal thoughts, but I just said I just can't live with this feeling. I need help, and it has to be effective. So I knew Jenetta. I had met her, and I was really impressed with the work she had done with the Westgate attack terrorist. And I thought, let me give it a try. And I didn't I could have contacted my other psychologist I had in Belgium for many years. And what we did in one session was just mind blowing. And then we did beautiful work on my mom and on my little sister. And when you talked, it just came up. It was also the look that adults had on me. And I was, judged as these are the little girls, everywhere we would go, it was like, oh, these are the little girls that just lost their mom and their dad. And we had people that we had no idea who they were, and they would come crying to us and, oh, are you okay? Poor you, what you've suffered. And they would just put victimize, our identity was victims. That was not the identity I gave myself. That's the identity I was given. And that was a really big battle that I had to go through throughout my life, to the point that my sister decided to never talk about what happened in her life. But till this day, it's something that she feels so vulnerable to talk about. And I was kind of in that place for a very long time. And then with the process with Jenetta, it really empowered me to actually be vulnerable, that it was as well a strength, and to actually also identify that I didn't want to be a victim. I never wanted to be a victim. That's not my identity. It's not what I was giving myself as an identity. And so, yeah, it really empowered me to be able to talk about it. And I'm not going to say I'm completely impermeable to what people are going to say or think, but I do have the tools to deal with it. And I can also know who I am and what I stand for. And I'm completely comfortable with the fact that it's part of who I am as well. So you like it or you don't like it, that's your own choice.
I just wanted to ask you, because you say it took you 19 years to suddenly deal with it. Did you find that you had to go back and kind of unravel each emotional barrier you had created in those 19 years?
No. The thing is, I was a kid when it happened, and I think that when we're kids, we deal with situations like that very differently. How I can put it is that we go a lot into fantasy, but we're also very realistic. Like when it all happened, I can see how my dad and the other lady that were adults when it happened, how it has impacted and affected their lives. And I'm not saying it hasn't impacted my sister and my life. We've dealt with it very differently. It was kind of, okay, this has happened. It was kind of in a movie. We were living a movie setting, But it was very black and white, if you want.
And I find it really interesting you didn't have nightmares, because that is something I suffered with a lot. And it was only when I really, truly and utterly accepted what happened, did my nightmares weren't nightmares anymore. It was the same dreams, but from a different perspective. So I just found it very interesting that something so traumatic that you've been through didn't affect you in your sleep. And because that is something I battled with a lot. And I got to the point where I was so confused between real life and my dreams.
Yeah, I think I did accept what happened very quickly. I didn't feel anger towards the people that shooted at us. I felt anger more to the world powers, etc., because the whole conflict it just didn't make sense from where I grew up and then suddenly what happened. And I was also really at peace with my mom and my sister. She was practicing Hinduism at the end of her life, and there's a say that the life that we live is like hell, and then when you're ready, you go to heaven. And so I don't know. That's how I kind of saw it, and my little sister was going to turn 5 years old, and it was kind of her little angel with her. Yeah, I always thought like, man, and I was the eldest, how would I have managed with two? Because I kind of became the mom of my sister, as much as she hates it, but that's kind of how it was. And I think what was the biggest thing to deal with was the fear, and still today. Like last night, I went for a run at night. I ran 24 kilometers from 7:30 p.m. till 10 p.m. And actually, I did it because I wanted to go and battle exactly that, do the mental gym of the fear. Because at night, I always have some fear that is there in different ways and forms, but I'm always super, who's behind me, who's in front, what's going on. And I'm in a super safe country, I'm in Norway. But that's one of the biggest things that I dealt with. And as well, how, with Jenetta, how we worked on the person that I was when I was a kid. I was already very independent. That made me even more independent. But how it actually impacted my life in a positive way, not only look at the negative way. So it was a lot of work on that and on the fear. And a bit like you, because my dad, he was very present for a bit, and then he completely abandoned us as well. And like you, so we're pretty much both in as teenagers, and it's kind of, everything that we put into place to survive. We got the mom energy through different people, we got the father energy through different people, and it's beautiful because it's always there.
So looking back, I felt depressed since I was very young. I think I remember wishing I wasn't alive from about the age of 8. And yeah, for my experience of that was just very much a flatness. Never felt really happy. Well, I guess it was more than flatness, because I felt sad most of the time. Nothing really struck joy. I had quite an emotionally abusive childhood, which I didn't. I'd punish myself in terms of, well, everybody has it so much worse than me, and I guess I continuously asked myself why I was the way I was, when it wasn't like I'd been through anything terribly dramatic or sudden or awful. And then, I went through a few years when I was in my late 20s. I finally felt like I'd sort of hit a better balance in my life, and I got married and had children. And then my children became unwell, all at the same time. And it was like my world just crashed down. They were everything I was living for. I think, I'd found my purpose with them. And for the first time in my life, I felt really angry. I think that underneath all the sadness as a child, there was a lot of anger, but I'd never experienced it as anger. So when it came out, when my children were so unwell, it was a rage, and I had no idea what to do with it. I'd never learned how to deal with those kind of feelings. And I was so overwhelmed and felt so alone that I spent a lot of time wishing I was dead. And I spent a lot of time with the guilt, wishing that I was dead, because here I was with 3 children who needed me. And I knew how I should be feeling in my belief system, and had no idea how to feel it. And yeah, because of my feelings from a young age, I'd had more than 20 years of counselling. I'd tried it all. number of different psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists. I tried antidepressants, but as much as I felt like, I was desperate for the help and was willing to give it a go, I could never make myself take them consistently, which I think was maybe an unconscious knowing that I actually needed to just to work through how I felt. It wasn't like they lifted me when I was on them. Might have evened out some of the curves of real distress, but it didn't lift me, and I was looking for something to empower me. And so when I came across Jenetta, same thing, very, very different approach. And I think it was a hard one initially because I felt like, well, if I can change how I feel, then how I feel all those years was my fault. That was my thinking. You hear, I think there's that Western maybe idea about if we can take responsibility for something, then we've been an instigator of it, and that was a big preventer for me in terms of really trying it. But things couldn't have gone any worse, really, for how my family was coping with the situation by that point. And once I started working through the feelings, some of that guilt and shame about where I'd come to and how much ability I had to change how I felt about it, I was kinder to myself, even though I was pushing myself a lot harder. I guess the main difference between how I felt then and how I feel now is I have the difficult times, but they don't consume me. Obviously there were things that I was living for because I had that many times of wishing I was dead, but they're positive things rather than just for someone else or for something else. They're for me, and I feel the joy more strongly. So that's certainly something that is a motivator and inspiring for me.
So I just wanted to take the time to say thank you so much for everybody, A, for coming, and B, for sharing your stories. I think it's so important, and it's probably just to come full circle with what we've been saying, so empowering as well, just to listen to what everybody's gone through. And it's interesting when you talk about the feeling of alone. It's definitely something that I've experienced many a times in my own battles in life, particularly when I mentioned, obviously, when my brother passed. For me, I felt like I was the only person in the world that had lost a sibling, just like you guys were saying, you felt like the only people in the world that, were going through bulimia or depression or whatever it is. You always end up feeling alone. And that's the whole point of this forum, so that everybody else in the world feels less alone. And they understand that everybody ultimately is in the same boat a lot of the time, and you just don't know it. There's hundreds of thousands of people out there that feel just like you and ultimately have overcome the same, if not worse than you, and that's an inspiration. And what we're doing here is inspiring and motivating other people to be able to go on and share their story and ultimately be better. So I think it's just absolutely fantastic what we've done today. So a big thank you to everybody for being so open and honest.